Hello, everyone, and welcome to Runway to Frugal Innovation Forum 2022, Scaling Digital Innovations for Women's Financial Inclusion. My name is Oishi, and I wear a couple of different hats. The one most relevant for today's session would be that first I'll be moderating it, and I work for BRAC Social Innovation Lab as Manager of Innovation Ecosystem and Partnerships. And I'm on study leave right now in Boston, where there's a heat wave going on and it's warmer than Dhaka. So depending on where you're joining from, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for taking the time and joining in. We are really excited to bring this conversation forward, and we have an exciting group of panelists. So the session today, the discussion topic for today's session is infrastructure for inclusion, how to make digital solutions and services gender intentional. So as you can see, there are a lot of keywords here that are very heavy and very important to be discussed. And I'm very excited to introduce our speakers for the session. We have with us Snigdha Ali, Bangladesh Program Officer, Financial Services for the Poor, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We have Nova Ahmed, Associate Professor, Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, North-South University, Bangladesh. And we have Gagandeep Singh Manchandaaggan, Market Engagement Manager, Connected Women, GSMA. We'll hear from our speakers in a bit, but before that, I would like to give a few little stats and context to our discussion, which might otherwise seem very a cliche discussion. We think that we understand financial inclusion, and we understand that when it comes to women using financial products, we understand that there might be a little bit of hesitance, little bit of fear of technology and behavioral barriers. But oftentimes people who work closest to these populations understand that the nuances are far wider and far more deeper. Decision-making for household finances or using technology are unfortunately highly gendered, and significantly so for communities of first-generation and emerging internet users, as well as smartphone users. When we put the use of technology and financial products together, it can be often too complicated, intimidating for women who are just learning to use both together, unfortunately. Half of the unbanked population globally are women. Women in developing economies are 9% less likely to own a bank account than a man. A research by Pi Strategy in Bangladesh finds 13% gender gap in phone ownership, 14% gender gap in mobile financial service account ownership, 29% in bank account ownership. The gender gap in financial inclusion may take more than a century to meet. How can we do more with less? That's the question on the background that we would be approaching through different discussions and perspectives from practitioners who have approached this problem from their work. So with that, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Gagandeep Singh Manchandaaggan. And Gagandeep, my question to you would be, has the gender gap in mobile ownership and smartphone access reduced? How are partnerships such as Connected Women building digital and financial inclusion for women? Off to you, Gagan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Oishi, for the lovely introduction and setting the tone up. Very relevant question. Is the gender gap reduced? Yes, it is reducing. It has reduced tremendously in the last couple of years, but we feel a lot of work still needs to be done. The mobile gender gap is driven by social, economic, and cultural factors, which result in women experiencing various barriers, as you mentioned, to mobile ownership and use. We see mobile ownership, or we see the entire journey of mobile internet user journey into 4 different steps. The first step is mobile ownership. Second is awareness to mobile internet. Third is mobile internet adoption. Fourth, regular mobile internet users. And it's very important to see the gender gap at various stages. See, the gender gap awareness, or the gender gap in awareness of mobile internet continuously, it's reducing across all countries we survey. From 2017 to 2020, the number of women who owned a mobile increased by over 130 million. But further to translate, 83% of women own a mobile phone today. But overall, only 58% women are using mobile internet. Moving on to smartphone, is the first time we have experienced reduction in gender gap in smartphone ownership since 2017. Women are now 15% less likely than men to own a smartphone, down from 20% in 2019. A very important point which we surveyed in the latest mobile gender report 2021 was that women were more likely than men to access the internet exclusively on a mobile phone. That means they don't have access to laptops, they don't have access to desktops. The only source of internet for them is a mobile handset, and that's in most of the countries. So we've seen the progress all through last couple of years, but despite this progress, our research shows that women represent the majority of unconnected, especially in the low and middle income countries where 933 million women do not yet use mobile internet, and 374 million women still do not own a mobile phone. Now, to address this, we started Gsma Connected Women program, which aims to reduce the gender gap in mobile internet and mobile money services and unlock significant commercial opportunities. But, it's important to understand the word commercial, which I'll sum up later. In this Connected Women initiative, we invite our operators to make a formal commitment to reach women with a target and a date. That means, so currently, the women proportion of their overall base is say 50%. We take a target, okay, to go to 56% by X number of years. And further, we support them by sharing new insights on their market, identifying different barriers relevant to their market, and we further help them in addressing these barriers. We also provide free access to our mobile internet training toolkit, which is also called MIST, which is a flexible train-to-trainer, set of resources. Now, MIST content provides resources to train first-time or low data users for the first time. There are very simple modules like introduction to internet, online safety, mobile money, and more. These content basically helps them in understanding the various basic nitty-gritties of the mobile internet, like how to use a Facebook, how to use Google, how to use YouTube, how can I find a job, and so on. We're trying to create a repository. We keep on adding more material in terms of making sure that women understand the need, the relevance of it, addressing one of the major barriers, which is today. So far, our operator partners have reached over 55 million additional women with mobile money or mobile internet services. Just to sum up the statement, mobile has the power to transform lives. We all know that. It can help women, empower themselves, making them more connected and safer, providing access to information, services, and opportunities such as health information, financial services, and employment opportunity, often for the first time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gagan. And if you would like to elaborate a little bit on this, so just to sum up, would you say that the infrastructure right now, does it look promising? And how would you say it has transformed during COVID times? When I say infrastructure, yes, we have a lot of operator partners now on the Connected Women program who are working with us in reducing the overall gender gap across. During COVID time, if to have to note down, we initially see a great traction of mobile internet, mobile use. But that was just the start of the entire pandemic. Everybody was moving into digital. I'll not be able to comment today how it all shaped up. However, our new gender gap report 2022 will be out next month, where we cover this entire part. We've yet to read, and so we'll not be able to answer completely on that. Initially, yes, we saw some traction in the positive way, but we need to learn more on how it has impacted, in years to come. Definitely. I think based on what you just shared with us, there's definitely hope. There are definitely opportunities and promises.
Absolutely.
And with that note, I would like to move on to our next speaker, Nova Ahmed. And my question to you, Nova Appa, would be, you've been working on the field since the pandemic, and COVID was a big push for technology usage for everybody, and mostly people who did not have an alternative choice. So you have been talking to women as well as people from transgender and indigenous communities in Bangladesh. What would you say you learned that practitioners can find useful now or even beyond COVID?
Thank you very much. Thanks for the question. And it also gives me an opportunity to share what I found. So what happened was during the COVID period, we were looking at how women, it was a study that targeted women, but there were transgender male and marginalized population. And what were the barriers and what were the opportunities? So as you mentioned, the marginalized community, let me start with that. So it was actually very interesting to see that technology added value to most of the communities. It added a great opportunity because the COVID pushed us towards contactless transaction. It pushed us towards a lockdown situation. So technology was required for basic communication, for sending out money. So when we met the transgender community, they said they're not very technology savvy. But during the pandemic, there was a story like one of the participants' niece was in such a position that she could not eat. She did not have anything to eat. And the person we interviewed, she identified herself as a woman. So she said she right away sent out the money. And she said she was able to do that because as a community, they stuck together. So it was a great learning from technology perspective, like how it added value in the difficult time. Also, it showed, because they said nobody will look after me. I cannot go out, I cannot earn money, so I have to stick to my community. So what they did was the people who had food, they would share with others. And we have seen the very same type of structure in the indigenous communities, particularly those who are not, economically forward ones. So in Khagrachuri, we met another community and they shared very similar stories, like how they were all together and reached out to each other. So from technology side, we found another very marginalized community in Cox's Bazar, the Rakhine community. And they were telling us how during the COVID time, one of them started their own fintech business because they said they were not treated fairly. So one of them thought they should have their own business started. And that was another very motivating story. And when I was listening to that participant, another one shared how she was looking at YouTube videos because she does tailoring work and how she was using it. So these were the opportunities, but along with the opportunities, because the usage was higher, the challenges also increased. So the challenges were not same for all the communities. So because I just did the analysis, so I kind of divided into 3 different groups. So for the emerging users or for the frequent users of technology, the challenges were mainly related to secured technology. So they were worried that especially for fintech, because they were using it very mainly for the mobile wallets. I should be very specific, mostly for that. They were using it frequently, but they were worried because there were mistransactions, there were fraud calls, and those fraud calls varied from region to region. Sometimes it's a Jiner Batsha, I don't know, it's a gene, so king of gene or something. And sometimes it's like a police officer, sometimes it's a mobile operator. So those things varied also. So it was mostly the security of that. And the nice part was people, the agents and the people using it, they were suggesting us ways where it can be done better. That means it adds value to them. They're trying to make it better. It's not like they're complaining to so that it can be done in a better way. So those were major challenges because there is trust issue, there's money issue, and there is technology fear. So whenever you have that, you will try to outsource it towards the agent. And whenever you have someone in between, you lose the independence. And independence is important because we heard stories from young girl, like she said, when I can encash my money using Bcash, when I can do it directly, when I can enter the money to my mobile phone, I don't have to get the harassment calls, because when they go to an agent, they have to write the numbers, and it actually opens up their unwanted calls. So that independence is important, but also, I mean, secure transaction was also another thing that we widely heard about. And when it was the users who were low literate, that was another group. They wanted to use it, but they were depending on the agents. These were the low literate users. And there, they talked about how difficult it was to do the transactions by themselves. So when we're talking about low literate or illiterate groups, they have numerical literacy. So they were telling us we could just put money in our phone. We can use the mobile phone cards, but this transaction is so difficult. I forget the steps. I cannot remember all these steps. So that's another thing. So I know as a system designer, I can only imagine when you want to make it secure, it becomes complex. When you want to make it simple, it adds all these vulnerabilities. But it's there we have to look at the better balance probably here. And along with that, actually, there was another group, I should definitely mention it, the group that was absolutely digitally disconnected. So this group, because we studied during the COVID period, this group was the low literate group, low economically developed group. And when you are disconnected from technology or internet, and they were actually further marginalized. And during the COVID time, we saw several groups receiving government funds, government support, local governance support. This group remained actually very, very remote from all that. So probably when we are thinking, we have to think about maybe a community-driven way, a way to engage them somehow so that they can stay connected. I was thinking of using the school rooms because they have, most of the schools, even the remote ones have a digital lab. So maybe reusing them afterwards, engaging the youth. I don't know, but these are the ideas that's coming right into my head. Yeah, so challenges remain, but the opportunity actually surpasses that. That's what probably I'm a bit biased. It does not solve the problem, I should say, but it's a vehicle that makes things easier. It's definitely a vehicle. So we should look at those small pieces and see where we can make things a little bit easier. Add a small part where it gives you that independence, gives you that confidence. That's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Novapa. And this looks like a very elaborate work and really gives us the idea about different subgroups within when we think of people who are first generation internet users or digitally excluded. We kind of block everybody into the same group as an outsider. And it's really good to see the nuanced findings that you've had in terms of how people experienced exclusion and inclusion in different. Thank you so much for sharing insights on that. With that, I would move on to our next speaker, Snigdha. And my question to you, Snigdha, would be, we've heard from Gagan about the infrastructure and a lot of promises in terms of what Gagan mentioned, that it's the first time reduction in gender gap in mobile phone ownership. These are huge milestones compared to the situation, the reality that we face because of COVID. But we know while infrastructure is the backbone of financial inclusion, but it alone does not really guarantee access or inclusion if we cannot meet women where they are. So Snigdha, how would you say the Gates Foundation addresses the social norms and realities and these nuances that they bring that limit meaningful access to technology for women?
Thanks, Oishi. Before I kind of talk about how Gates Foundation is engaged in addressing social norms, let me just tell you a bit about why social norm is so important. And as you rightly pointed it out, infrastructure alone does not guarantee women's access to financial services. And what we have heard from Gagandeep of Gsma and Nova of North-South University is that sure, there's mobile ownership, the gender gap in mobile ownership is reducing. And of course, as you said, infrastructure is the backbone for financial inclusion and addressing the gender gap. And what Nova was also mentioning about the lack of kind of financial literacy in the sense whether either it's too complicated or less complicated, and then women kind of shying away because of the lack of consumer protection, getting fraud calls or other harassment calls, and etc. So let me step back a bit. Bangladesh has a pretty robust system of ID and a number of digital payments platforms like the National Payment Switch Bangladesh, NPSB, ICPay, or mobile financial services like bKash, Rocket, Nagod, etc. And yet the gender gap in financial inclusion is 29%, as we all know, according to the last Findex report published in 2017. And as both of our speakers have mentioned, there's a possibility that we may see some improvements in this because of the digitization of wages, social safety net transfers during the pandemic. We still have a long way to go. So why is it that despite many interventions and attempts, women still lag behind? I think we have not looked at one parameter that actually cuts across each of the separate obstacles that we consider when we're trying to decipher the gender gap, and that is social norms. The constraints that are rooted in norms often create sticky behavior that discourages women from realizing their full potential by availing the financial services, and that are hard to change. I'll give you an example from Kenya. In Kenya, women do have the right to property rights, but women usually are unable to exercise these rights. So Women's World Banking worked with Kenya Commercial Bank to address these constraints. These constraints, I mean that constraints on women's access to credit due to a lack of collateral. So usually in rural areas, ownership of property or the proof of property ownership is used as a collateral. So Kenya Commercial Bank adapted its credit assessment process to a cash flow-based model that gives banks more visibility of the true size and potential of the businesses in question. More than 500 relationship managers were trained in the new methodology and received exposure to women's businesses. The proposition supported a more thorough and accurate evaluation of creditworthiness and allowed for stronger risk assessment. The broader strategy for developing a tailored value proposition for women-owned medium and small micro enterprises has shown positive results. Now, women's loan portfolio rose from 22% in 2015 to 51%. The gender norm that women should not own property was not directly tackled by this intervention, but the shift in portfolio may contribute to a change in perception among bank staff for women-owned businesses and their creditworthiness. So what we are seeing here, that social norms are both embedded in people's minds and in institutions, and changing norms will require working with a range of stakeholders in the financial market system, of course, to understand their incentives and capacity to change their behavior, but also partnership with actors from outside the usual financial inclusion stakeholder arena. For example, women's empowerment advocacy organizations or women's entrepreneurship associations. It could include leveraging champions and role models for women's economic empowerment in organizations through public campaigns and engaging men in the conversation. When we are talking about gender gap, we definitely need to focus on women, but we have to have men included and engaged in the conversation. CGAP and FinEquity are currently facilitating a collaborative learning effort of 6 funders and market facilitators that are diagnosing gender norms affecting women's financial inclusion in Bangladesh, India, Malawi, Rwanda, Tunisia, and Zambia. And for the Bangladesh part, the Gates Foundation's Bangladesh portfolio for financial services for the poor is engaged. We have invested in this research, and some of the very known but really still kind of astounding findings, that some of the early findings, the study is yet to wrap up. And it actually gives us hope. It tells us that there are some normative behaviors, both from the demand side, which is the women clientele, potential clientele, and both from the supply side, which are the financial service providers, regulators, etc. It can be changed. So the next step is to deep dive of this research. First, the study has identified some of the behaviors, and then the next step is to deep dive and how to kind of disentangle the roots and then move beyond those normative behaviors and with some recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Snigdha. I think we're doing great in terms of time, and I would, at this point, before starting round 2 of questions, I would request our audience, if you would like to ask questions, feel free to drop them on the chat. And if you want to direct it to a specific speaker, feel free to mention. If not, I'll do that for you. So feel free to ask any questions if you have. With that, I would like to move on to round 2 of our discussion today. And I'd like to go back to our speaker, Gagandeep. And my question to you, Gagan, would be that now that smartphones and regulators are cheaper and more accessible to low-income communities, what's the next stage of inclusion? And what are partners doing about it?
I think, thank you for the question, Ajay. Very important question. I think, first of all, it's as Ms. Ali mentioned, it's important to understand, what is preventing women from being digitally included. Through our extensive research, we've discovered 5 key barriers preventing women from accessing and using the mobile phones. Those 5 barriers are access, affordability, relevance, knowledge and skill, and safety and security. Now, while designing the products, it's important that we consider these barriers. And not only that, it's important to consider, whether adapting your mainstream products can reach female customers effectively or not, or do we need some other interventions in creating, some specific products. Apart from that, we also wrote a practical guide, Reaching 50 Million Women with Mobile. That's one of our most read study, where we talk about what are the steps which, a partner needs to take to be able to, reach more women. So, first and foremost, it's very important to ensure there's a focus on gender equality and reaching women at the organization level. When I say organizational level, that means, there's a sign off from a senior leadership that, yes, this is something which we need to address. Second is, understanding the mobile gender gap. It's important to understand your data. However, we also advocate that, if you're unable to identify the data, identify the gender gap, that should not stop you in, putting in efforts, taking initiatives to address the gender gap. Third, and the most important one, what we feel is explicitly address women's needs, circumstances, and challenging in designing the product. That means, we are focusing on women, we are addressing the barriers, we are studying about the barriers, we are doing our research, and based on that research, we are, creating certain products which, helps you in addressing the gender gap. Let me just share an example of one of our operator partners. Safaricom Kenya launched an initiative called Mesha Ni Digital. That means life is digital. They focused on subsidizing the entry-level new range of smartphones at a competitive price of around $35 to $40. Now, these phones had a very light version of Android's operating system, which didn't need too much data. So, they reduces data requirement for the customer, which saved them money. They allowed customers to purchase the device using different payment methods like cash, loyalty points, M-Pesa, and so on. They also partnered and launched a new smartphone financing scheme, which allowed customers to make payment on daily installments. Now, all these small initiatives, had a great impact on the overall brand perception of Safaricom. It helped address the barriers which the Kenyan women were facing on daily basis. In fact, it helps us address affordability, relevance, and the digital skills. Over 500,000 new devices were sold over 12 months, 56% to women. 95% of owners reported they have increased their mobile consumption, which also gave a commercial benefit to Safaricom. So it helped Safaricom create a very positive social impact on users, particularly women. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gagan, for that. And just for added context, Kenya is actually, what many people don't understand is 2/3 of Kenyan women are still unbanked. And basically 2/3 of unbanked population in Kenya are women. And for many of these women in Kenya or Bangladesh, actually, the digital inclusion happened through financial inclusion, through when they started using a cell phone. When BRAC went to the ground 7 years ago, we started off by teaching numbers and then teaching how to use a basic feature phone, and then from that to other services. So for many women, that has also been the reality. Thank you so much for bringing that up as well. With that, I would move on to our next speaker, Novapa. And my question, Novapa, you've shared a lot from your research and the nuances of it, but there are many, many challenges that still remain unresolved. So what would you say those challenges are?
From technology side, there are some challenges. There are some challenges from the financial side. So let me elaborate a little bit on the financial challenges I have seen, because we studied right after the lockdown period. So what we found out was many of the communities or many of the individuals were actually struggling economically, especially the small business owners, the people who were working with individuals or working with a corporate. They had someone to ask for, like, okay, there were a driver community, they would go to their owners to get some extra help. But for communities, they were like vegetable seller community, they would do their small business, they have very low profit margin, it's almost the daily basis business. So those type of communities struggled a lot. Also, there were communities, there were rich women. I mean, apparently socially they were seen as middle income or high income women. They also struggled. We had a widow. She used to get her monthly income from the house rents, but the tenants left during the COVID period. So she did not have any earning, and she struggled from the social prejudice. She could not tell that she is struggling with her 2 little kids. And it was a tremendous pressure. It was such a pressure that she started actually crying when she was sharing us the story. And one of her aunt actually thought about her and sent out money. She asked her to open a mobile wallet account, and she opened it and she got the money. So that was, one struggle. Another, in some communities where they were earning, the families were running by foreign remittance, they also struggled because for example, there were families from workers of Singapore working in Singapore, and all the works were stopped. So what happened, these families actually struggled a lot, And they right away relied on the loan sharks, or a loan with very high interest rates, rather than going through formal institutions. And when we asked them about, and they were also worried about the high interest rate, how they would pay it off. And when they were sharing this, we found out that it's much higher than the formal institutes are offering. And they would say that the hassle, the humiliation they receive when they go to the formal institutions, and how they might be treated, the fear and the concept, like it might be bad. Some of them have never been to a bank or anything. They have this perception. So that was another thing. And also we have seen how the urban and rural communities are very different, because the urban communities have better access to semi-formal or formal institutions, because the agent-based bankings, the agents would go to them. But poor people, like the garments workers or the slum, the people living in the slum area, in urban area, they don't have this access. So they would struggle the most. So that was another type of struggle we saw. It was a financial struggle, not having the habit of saving. It's always when they earn more, they spend more, but there is no formal concept of how to manage money, how to do it, especially for women, because for very early age, the monetary transaction is given to the boy, and whenever it comes to financial issues, they feel inconfident. Even women who are earning money, and we have seen that, they will give it to their spouse and he will manage it. There are things like that. So so these are also barriers, and social structure, social norms play a big role. But what we have seen is in lower income communities who are earning money, for women, it's easier to break those social norms compared to the educated groups. It's a qualitative study, so it's not representative. We went to smaller groups, but in the groups we saw, like the garments worker or the woman who is working as a maid, she would send money to her mother and her maternal families, which is against the social norm after you're married. But it's very difficult. They would struggle, they will feel bad, but going beyond the norm becomes a big, like it feels like it's a invisible shackle. So those things were very, very suffocating to watch. Along with that, there were other struggles, like internet addiction was a problem when we talk about technology. That also came, and school teachers were all going to the online platforms. So how to learn about what to teach, how to learn about the new transition. So people who had children, people who had grandchildren learned faster because they had people to ask for. So there were teachers who were struggling more. So, I mean, these were all challenges, but every challenge, I think, opens a little bit of opportunity that we can do something there. Thank you. I think I talked too much. Sorry.
No, not at all, Nava. But thank you so much. And again, like the nuances, I think it's incredible that we've heard about the infrastructure and connectivity, and there are barriers, but there are also opportunities. And we've heard from you about the use cases and the barriers on the ground that still remain. But there are more blind spots that still remain on an ecosystem level. And my next question to you, Snigdha, would be, how might development partners help identify these blind spots within the ecosystem? And how would they incentivize or enable gender intentionality on a systems level? Are there lessons from your work others can learn from?
Let me I don't know whether there are lessons, but yes, I'm going in the direction that you just mentioned. In order to identify blind spots, we need to have enough data. Without enough data, we don't even know where to begin, right? Any initiative needs to be evidence-based, which can only be done through having a full understanding of the market, the policy environment, and other factors. We do have some fantastic data that is regularly produced. For example, Gsma, CGAP. And the foundation supports the World Bank for the very widely used comprehensive data bank of Findex. But we need more. I believe that we need to have more qualitative data as well to complement the numbers that come from the quantitative studies, because that provides a more contextual, nuanced insights that affect women's access or the lack of it, their decision-making behaviors, etc. So having that in mind, for last year, we supported North-South University that Nova is leading to look at the intersections of gender and technology, and especially in rural and semi-rural and some urban areas, simply to understand, is it only infrastructure, not only, sorry, is it mainly infrastructure? Is it financial literacy? Is it social norm? Is it lack of financial capability? Is it mobility? What it is? And we are very eagerly waiting for the final report to come out, but Nova has shared a lot with me already. And, you know, it is a robust finding of what she shared just now. And after that, the Gates Foundation's Bangladesh portfolio then invested in another study, which is kind of a countrywide comprehensive study, but primarily qualitative, also backed by some quantitative. So there's a triangulation. And this larger study will look at women's obstacles and barriers to access the financial services. Again, it will be a combination of factors of looking at different aspects, cutting across everything, including social norms, including financial literacy, mobile internet use, mobile ownership, or the lack of it, etc. So again, we hope that from these two studies, for a market like Bangladesh, and of course backed by GSMA's global studies, CGAP and others, Pinequity and all there that is already available, we will have a much better, much deeper understanding what to do next, how to go to the next step. And if I can just share briefly, when I met, we know that Bangladesh has launched its first ever National Financial Inclusion Strategy, Bangladesh NFISB. And when I went to meet the team at the Bangladesh Bank who are in charge of kind of guiding and implementing this financial strategy policy, they also told me that they really are looking forward to the next Findex that will be coming out this summer. Because to build an action plan to implement this first ever inclusion strategy, they need to have data, because they're waiting on an action plan to take it to the field, but they need to have data-backed information and evidence so that this action plan can be most effective. So I think all the development partners coming together and maybe sharing a hub of all the data that is available. Most of the data are publicly available in any case, but if you could have a data hub so that anybody who is maybe, you know, approaching it for the first time can go to a hub and look at that, all that is relevant for his or her work, that could be another, you know, thing to ponder. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Snigdha. But with that, we are almost towards the end of this session. We have one question from the audience that I would like to open it up to all speakers if anybody wants to take it. So how might regulators or organizations support sandboxing new technology to ensure new fintechs and digital services are tested by real users before they go live? Normally, there are many regulatory restrictions to launching a DFS service. Does anybody want to take this question?
I can start. I'm the lame person like the academics, so I'm on the back bench. Probably the others have more connections and towards the policy level. But from my perspective, I think when we want to make technology inclusive, we have to listen to different voices. Only then we can have a better design, a better support services. And when we are talking about the regulations, I mean, we have to actually go for evidence-based. Now we have the evidences, like why we need to improve those or enhance those regulations. Only then probably we have all the things we need, but that's theoretical. Probably let me hear from others. Thank you.
Thank you, Navalpa. Would anyone else like to take it? Snigdha, sure.
So very briefly, our current engagement with one financial provider and one financial services provider, one bank, and another is an engagement with female entrepreneurs in rural areas. Both engagements are looking at piloting new financial products that will benefit, in one case, just women, rural women in general, and in the other, rural and semi-rural female entrepreneurs. So that's in their initial stages, but both will be based on data. There are some studies and data, and then we will see how it works out. So at a small level, we will be piloting two products to see whether it increases inclusion for women.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Snigdha. I think that's all we would have time for. So thank you so much. I would really thank everybody, all our audiences who were listening to us, and as well as our speakers who spent time preparing for this, and our organizers who you can't see here, but shout out to BRAC and BRAC Social Innovation Lab for organizing this conference. I think the greatest part is optimism that we're taking away from this discussion, that yes, there are gaps and barriers and challenges that remain, and that remain in a very nuanced, complicated manner, but there are opportunities as well as promises that we're looking at, from infrastructure to how people are using this, how people are facilitating use cases among themselves, as well as how development partners are actually looking at the data gap in this to bring more and more players up to date with what's happening and what else is needed. So thank you so much, everyone, for a fantastic conversation, and we'll be signing off. Thank you so much. If you're tweeting, please remember to use the hashtag #ScaleFrugal. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.